Hello and welcome to the Disability Entrepreneurs Festival. Today I'm speaking with Aviva Beecher Kelk. The fabulous Aviva is one of the founders of Clickability.com, the first Australian disability services directory with customer ratings and reviews. Aviva is a social worker and is doing a PhD looking at what information needs to be out there to make the NDIS work. That's a big one. Thanks so much for joining us, Aviva, and thanks for being part of the Disability Entrepreneurs Festival.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're talking a bit about businesses, structures of businesses. When did you set up Clickability and what made you interested in doing that?
Yeah, so we've been going for 5 years now. And my co-founder Jenna and I set it up in response to being social workers and some of the issues that we were seeing. She was working with people with acquired brain injuries and starting in her organisation to go through some change management from pre-NDIS to NDIS. And I was working with people with mental health issues, who a lot of whom might have the kind of psychosocial disability that might get NDIS funding. And we were both seeing that there were really big problems with trying to help those participants navigate the sector as it was, and thinking about overlaying even more choice into that and to have more responsibility placed on these consumers to navigate it themselves was just like, I don't see how that's going to work. That's going to be a red hot mess. So we really thought, what's the best way of actually empowering these people that we're working with and their families to be able to navigate this incredibly complex service sector by themselves, so that they can be consumers, they can really realise choice and control, and they can use the NDIS for the best, for what it's intended. And we were like, what exists in other industries? There's TripAdvisor, there's Zomato if you want to go to a restaurant. And back then, I think it was still Urban Spoon. Why don't we have that in the disability sector? Why have we never heard of people, of it feeling safe to write reviews in the disability sector and having some transparency that's consumer driven? So we thought, let's do it. And so we popped up Clickability 5 years ago and took it around Geelong, where the trial site was at that point, spoke to a lot of people. And we've made some iterations, a few changes in the last 5 years. But that's essentially, that's our aim, and that's what we're trying to do still.
Wow. And did you just start, it was just the two of you when you first started?
Yeah, it was.
And did you have was that your actual job, or you had another job you were still doing to pay the rent?
Yeah, both. So I had started a PhD, and Jenna was still working. I think she was working 4 days a week when we started in another position, in a leadership position somewhere else. So yeah, it was I think it took us maybe 12 or 18 months to both be full-time.
Yeah. And when did you know that you could jump off and you could start making this your job? When was that?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of when can we, and there's the sort of financial security piece of it, but there's also which sometimes is there and sometimes is not there, right? But there's also if we're going to grow this, we need to just commit, we need to jump in, and we need to be available to help this thing get bigger. So there was a bit of a leap of faith at some point of just, we need to give this full-time go.
Yeah, and did you have to go through a process of, there's often a lot of talk about pitching and finding money and all of that stuff. Did you go through any of that process?
Yeah, we've done a lot of pitches. Actually, we're in this very strange position. The first pitch we ever did was to Richard Branson. It was a pitch competition that was some kind of tech company, and so that was the first ever dipping our toes into pitching, and needless to say, we were very nervous. There are a lot of pitch competitions out there, and it's actually a really nice way to consolidate the message and to really think about, how do I bring in a really concise way without using any jargon, and really explaining to a room full of tech people about what the NDIS is and what disability is and why making a choice might be challenging. That's a challenge to communicate that clearly and concisely. So doing these pitch competitions is really useful. And we've done quite a few of them. There's a few sort of social enterprise intermediary groups. We think of ourselves as a social enterprise, that we're a for-purpose business. We're bringing the social impact and the commercials. So we were involved with a few programs along the way that those social enterprise groups had run, and a few pitch competitions that went along with that too. And you asked about money as well as pitching, didn't you?
Yeah. How did you, how did you actually find the money you needed? I mean, to be at that point where you're doing this as your job, there's sooner or later you've got to be paying yourself something. So where did you find money from? How did that happen? Did you do it as a fee for service from the start? Did you base yourself on grants? What did you do?
Yeah, a combination of all of that. So some serious bootstrapping, and having the other jobs on the side as well. And we have had a few grants along the way. We've been lucky enough to have a grant from the NDIS with the ILC, and we've had a grant from another government agency in South Australia, and a little bit of other bits and pieces here and there. But mostly we've just been bootstrapping and incrementally paying ourselves more as we've had more income, because we were really clear that we wanted to be sustainable. Part of the issue that we see, or that we have seen historically in the disability space, is that great organisations come in but aren't very commercial and leave again, and that causes harm as well as anything else, because we've seen it in the NDIS space that suppliers have become bankrupt and just overnight stopped supplying services, and people are left in their beds and can't get up, right? And obviously we're not supplying services, and there's a bit of a different conversation there, but we were really keen to have the financials sound. So we charged from the word go, and there was a bit of culture change to do around that, because when we started, it was really early NDIS days, and the idea of a competitive marketplace, of marketing, of spending money on marketing, which is essentially what our service provider customers are doing, was really new. And ditto for consumers, about thinking about writing reviews, and about, that's quite vulnerable to write a review. That was very new as well. So doing a lot of very patient culture change and education to both sides of the marketplace that we're working in was really important.
I think that's an interesting point, because we've found that at the Disability Leadership Institute, there's almost a culture of, if it's about disability, it must be charity, therefore it must be free. And so bringing any funds or any money into it, charging for services, is really outside the thinking zone for quite a lot of businesses, consumers, the people supporting them. It's a really interesting space. Even government finds it interesting to be paying a fee for service element for anybody working in the disability areas. So did you have to tackle that one?
Yeah. We even found that there were some groups and some peak bodies, even on the consumer side, who wouldn't engage with us because we were registered as a proprietary limited company, and that was enough for them to be like, nah, and that's started to change. But certainly even in registering for the NDIS, there's been some barriers that we've heard about from providers who are not for profit, to even just to register. So there's a huge culture change there for everybody. Obviously, it stems from charity and government, but it's culture. It's it's just an attitude that is had. Yeah.
So, and you mentioned that for purposing. So while we're trying to run businesses that are in the disability space, we're also trying to change the understanding of what that might look like. So it's not just running a business. I'm just going to mention politely to the audience that both Aviva and I are in locations where building work is being undertaken today. And so there will be some background noise. We've both decided to ignore it, which I didn't just do then, but I'm going to continue to do now. Okay. Something I'm particularly interested in, Aviva, is now. Where are you at now, 5 years down the track? You're employing people. When did you first start employing people? What was that experience like? And where are you up to these days?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, when did we first start employing people? We actually first started with a group of volunteers, and I think at that time Jenna and I were essentially volunteering as well. And some of those volunteers transitioned into paid positions, and some of those people are still with us. when we had the grants, we sort of had a project that went with them. So there was a couple of employees that have come in or whose roles have developed around, doing those projects, and those projects fitted in with where we wanted to be long term or things that we wanted to test and to accomplish. But they were, a thing in and of themselves. Sorry, can you ask the question again? I started thinking about
I'm interested in what you the experience of actually hiring your first person, and
okay.
I remember, when I hired my first staff member, this is my business, so it's my money, and it was very different to hiring somebody when I was running an organisation. That's somebody else's organisation, even though I was highly vested in it. But recruiting my own people and paying them out of my money in my bank account was it was a bit scary. It's like becoming an aunt for the first time or something. How did you feel when you did it?
Yeah, there's certainly a sense of, oh my gosh, I really have to value this person, isn't there, and have to get this right. We've learned a lot about, I guess HR is what it is, but about we can write a position description all we want, but a person is not a piece of paper. So, and the culture piece, you can't train culture, but you can't train personality, but certainly you can train skills. So we've developed bits and pieces of training to kind of to think, actually as a team we worked, what's the clickability culture, and how do we see that, how do we enact that in our everyday, what we're doing, and pull that into a piece of training that we've then delivered. Or, how do we communicate in a tone of voice that sounds like what clickability is? Because sometimes we want to be fun and fresh and young. You're talking about brand to me before we started filming this. So there are some qualities of the brand that we want, but also the things that we're tackling can be really hard. So, for consumers calling up very distressed, trying to find services, or providers who have had a really negative review and are feeling really distressed about that, there's some really serious stuff that we deal with. And bringing that together with kind of, youthful, fresh, non-traditional disability service kind of tone of voice has taken a while to develop that, and recruiting people who can fit into that and who can learn to speak in that way, and and without kind of doing the groupthink thing of, I want to employ someone who's exactly like me. There's a pull there, but I don't want to employ someone who's exactly like me. How boring, we'll end up being a whole room of Aviva and Jenners. That's not going to get us very far. We need to employ people who are better than us at whatever we're employing them for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, you're talking there about culture, which is broadly understood as just a vital underpinning of any organisation, doesn't matter who you are. And yet you've gone through a growth patch. So how many people have you got now?
So it's a funny time to be talking about growth, actually. We had quite a few people, and we've recently scaled back to start the next period of growth.
Yeah.
So I think at the biggest point we had 10 people in our team, and not all of them were full-time. Quite a few of them were part-time, doing particular roles. And that's been one of the ways that we've tried to be a really accessible workplace. Part of the way that we've done that is by allowing people to work from wherever suits them. Some people work from home, some people work from a shared space. And another way that we've done it is by sometimes we've sort of segmented off jobs. So a job that somebody might do has been in parts, so that you can offer a role to somebody who's really good at one part but is not so interested in another part. And that's been a really fabulous social impact from my perspective piece. Yeah.
So you've got, a number of people, you're bringing them all in, they're coming into a new organisation. You mentioned that culture being young and vibrant that you try and keep, and yet your team's also spread out across the country. You've got people in a few different locations. So how did you kind of maintain that culture? How did you make sure that you haven't got someone off in one location doing some weird thing and interpreting clickability as this, and another person over there doing something completely different? How did you keep that cohesion?
Yeah, I think that's basically what I was talking about before in the training and in the culture and working together to define what we're doing together. Certainly we've got a lot of online platforms. You and probably most people who are listening to this might have used Slack before, for example. We use that every day. So we don't have any internal emails anymore. It's all just chatting on Slack. We have a weekly kind of stand-up, well, it's a sit-down, but it's a stand-up meeting on a Monday. And we really try to think, if I was in an office with this person, I would just turn around and have a chat. So I'm going to just call them. I'm going to have, a Google Hangouts or something, and really tried to bring that into like real life and into real time, and not, we need to book a meeting for tomorrow. No, let's just talk today. We really make sure we've had a team get together at least once a year so that we all meet in person, and use that to create common language and common goals that we can work towards and refer to across the course of the year as well. And Jenna and I, coming from a social work background, have also social workers do this supervision thing, and often it's to debrief because, as a social worker, you're using your own emotions as your tool, essentially. And we've kind of adapted that and take a bit of a coaching model, and where we catch up with all of our staff regularly and make sure that everyone knows what's going on with everyone else. So that's been really key as well. And I think we were talking to somebody yesterday, I actually had a much bigger team, and we were talking about how we've coped with this, and thinking about, in a bigger team it would be more challenging. But because we've been small and we've been able to really bring that together and keep I think I just had another thought as I hadn't quite finished that sentence. But one of the other things I've been really keen to do is help people develop their leadership skills, and create some language around leadership as well, and proactivity, so that A, people can ask for what they need, hopefully, and B, we're all coming to each other with solutions when there's a problem, be that business related or culture related, or I'm feeling a bit dislocated, I don't know what's happening, or yeah,
absolutely. And so something I've been aware of is, the systems and processes I put in place now, whether it's something as crude as the bookkeeping or something as major as the human resources and culture structures. The processes, the stuff that's in place, needs to be able to withstand any sudden pressures, any bursts of growth, because they always happen when you don't expect them, somehow. And so actually putting in place systems and processes that are able to cope with any sudden pressures or growth. And how have you managed that side of things? Because you've had a similar kind of sudden surge of demand and stuff going on.
Yeah, look, we love systems and processes, and it's been something that has been a developing long-term relationship that we've had to come to love. But it's so important. It's so important to have those systems, because they're you're talking about withstanding growth. From my perspective, they're the scaffolding. We can be completely mad as long as we've got the scaffolding there to hold us up. And it's also a way that we can embed, they're human processes as well. This is your job until this bit, and then that's your job until there. So it's really important from all perspectives of the business. And you're right, you can't grow if you just either off in your own section, not working in a team, or if you're not using the systems that are there. So we have worked pretty hard to have tech-based systems. We're a tech company, so that's not completely surprising, but I guess I say that thinking about, maybe there are some people listening who are sole traders or who are clinical practitioners, or people who might like to keep a paper diary in some way. All of those things are fine if you're on your own, and you can kind of, this is where I am and this is where I am. But as soon as somebody else comes in, there needs to be systems to demarcate, this is where I am, this is where you are, this is where the customers are. And certainly in terms of keeping track of our customers and what comes in, and being able to flick from one person to the other person if someone's out of the office, everything needs to be written down. And it's not rocket science, but it's a different way of working, and a different quality that's needed when the company gets bigger, and when there are competing demands or different revenue streams, or different projects that the same customer is involved in, or different projects even that the same staff member is involved in. Keeping all of those written down. So, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, the company can keep going, but also so that the wisdom that we create in our organisation remains.
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny because these are sometimes the things it's easy to forget, or it's really
totally. They're so boring.
Well, they are boring, and when you're under pressure, learning how to, remembering to use the system, or making sure you're using the system, it's often the first thing to fall away, but it actually is what makes it possible to succeed. That's in a way. Yeah. We're pretty much out of time, but I like to ask a particular question when I'm interviewing anybody, and that is, who is a leader you admire and why?
Oh, that's a nice question. Oh, I'm finding it so hard to ignore this while I'm thinking creatively about the question you've asked me. I have so many leaders in my life who I admire. I don't have anybody in mind, but there are so many people who are running their own businesses and starting their own companies and creating social change in such a creative, meaningful way. And those people who do it with a sense of humour and a sense of grace, and manage to keep the lightness there and not take themselves so seriously. I really admire that. And especially the women who manage to do it in a way that they can keep their femininity as well as being very structured and I know where I'm going. And those people who can make me feel like I'm, just like the only person in the room, even though I'm one of 70 people that they need to say hello to in this moment. I can think of so many real life examples of people just in my networks who have those qualities, and those are things that I am really keen to be and to do.
Fantastic. Aviva Beecher Kelk, thanks so much for being part of the Disability Entrepreneurs Festival and for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.